Thanks. Hello everyone and welcome to the University of Guelph-Humber feature lecture. My name is Kelley
And my name is Marissa Tenassi.
and we are part of the academic services team that is putting on the feature lecture event, which showcases the accomplishments of our faculty.
And it is my pleasure to introduce our lecturer for this afternoon, Dr. Greg Kelley. Greg Kelley is originally from Atlanta, Georgia, where he completed his master's in English at the University of Georgia. Following his master's, he relocated to Indiana to complete his PhD at Indiana University in folklore and Renaissance literature. In the following years, Greg moved to Toronto in 2005, where he sought out a teaching position locally. His main field of interest lies in folklore and mediated culture, and has been given the opportunity to publish or to edit various books, as well as publish widely in narrative, pop culture, and humor studies. Greg is also affiliated with many associations, such as the Canadian Communication Association and American Folklore Society. Greg has been an instructor here at the University of Guelph-Humber in Media Studies since 2006, where he's been able to teach in his primary field of interest. He's made a positive impact on his students while at the university, winning the Faculty Appreciation Award, an impressive 2 times, once in 2010 and the next in 2012. He is also significantly involved in his students' education as he participates in both student and curriculum committees at the university. Today, Greg will be delivering a lecture on the wealth of material from commercial culture and the popular advertisements which are frequently adapted and ridiculed on the playground. He will draw on some striking examples, focusing on a few remarkable cases of folk parodies of commercials that have been outlasted by decades by the advertising campaigns that initially inspired them. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Greg Kelley.
Thank you. Thanks for coming, everyone. I was assured that as long as we had warm weather and food, everyone would show up. I'd like to extend thanks to a few select people before we begin. The support staff was great in organizing this event, and as you can see, they've done a fine job. Margaret, Sana, Kelley, and especially Marissa, thank you for the introduction. Marissa makes my life easy on a daily basis up here. And also the IT staff really helped out a lot. I had lots of little bits of sound clips and video clips and images here and there that I needed help with. And Mathen, Rick, Olga, they really helped me out a lot in that, on that account. And Jean, who's here, helping us out now. So, and Radek and Mark, I'll get to you in a minute. As an educator in media and a folklorist, I'm interested in all manner of human communication. I'm especially energized studying the complex relationship between face-to-face aesthetic forms and media culture. I teach a course called Subcultures in the Mainstream Media, and in there we analyze children as a discrete subcultural group, often at odds with the social and political agendas of dominant, read that, adult society. Subcultural groups of whatever ilk gravitate towards geographical locations that are separate from home life. And most often they territorialize rather than own these spaces. For skateboarders and graffiti artists, it might be the street. For Star Trek fans, the annual Trekkie convention in Las Vegas. Batman enthusiasts descend upon San Diego's Comic-Con. And online gamers find virtual communities. Similarly, subcultures of children, they congregate outside home in a space that we can conceive of generically as the playground. Now, it might not be a playground literally. It could be a city park. It could be a street cul-de-sac. It could be a treehouse in the backyard of a neighborhood friend. But importantly, it's a setting where children separate themselves from the authoritative watch of parents and teachers. And there, amid peer group play, children develop elaborate practices of nonsense and parody and secrecy that mitigate and undermine the power grip of dominant adult culture. The playground, in this metaphoric sense, becomes for children a tiny island of temporary social control in the vast sea that is adult-dominated society. It's headquarters for children's folklore, which bends toward the subversive, Consider, for example, the Christmas carols that are a familiar part of our cultural fabric. And I should say here, much of the material that I drew on for this talk came from archival sources, and these were written sources, but I wanted you to hear them in a sort of a performed sense. So I had help from my neighbor, Casey McKinnon, and also to a larger extent, a former student, Sean Fernando, is here, who sang some of these versions that were written, archived versions for us. This is what you're going to hear. So here's what I would ask. Do you know this one?
Joy to the world, the teacher's dead. We barbecued her head. Don't worry about the body, we flushed it down the party, and round it goes, and round it goes, and round it goes.
Now the rebellion, when he becomes famous, we'll remember this one. The rebellion goes up the administrative ladder. For one version tells us, if you're looking for the principal, he's hanging from the flagpole, sometimes with a rope around his neck. Even the custodial staff is not safe. As we learned, the janitor is gone, we flushed him down the John. Now what did the janitor do to deserve this? Let's be honest. Well, here's another Christmas carol, another one edited by children.
Deck the halls with gasoline, fa la 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 la. Light a match and watch it gleam, fa la 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 la. Watch the school burn down to ashes, fa la 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 la. Aren't you glad we played with matches, fa la 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 la.
I'm doing my part to restore Christmas spirit here in Philly. Now, what are we to think of children who cast themselves as criminal pyromaniacs? As psychopathic cannibals, dismembering educators and then flushing the incriminating evidence into oblivion? Well, I'd say it's a good place to start. Since children's folklore tends to subvert adult authority, when those same adults attempt to collect and document the material, children naturally clam up, or they censor, abridge, or sanitize the data. As a result, a child's performance becomes inauthentic and the study is compromised. This is the classic Heisenberg effect. That is, the object of the study changes because it's being studied. And nowhere in the social sciences is this more of an obstacle than in the ethnographic treatments of children. But besides the Heisenberg effect, there are serious ethical implications here. Rigorous and vetted methodology is essential to ensure that children are not manipulated or exploited by researchers. And you can imagine if you're an ethnographer interested in children's culture and you appeared willy-nilly at some local playground with a video camera and started recording them, well, you'd be lucky if you didn't end up in jail, right? So in the face of these kinds of difficulties, I asked my students to undertake a modest field project in which they collect and document a small corpus of songs, insults, rhymes, games, parodies, jokes, scary stories, and any other expressive cultural forms generated by children. They organize and record the folklore sessions with children, usually kids they already know, siblings, nieces, nephews, or neighbors. And the students select out and transcribe a handful of the most meaningful items. With the ethnographic data documented, the question arose as to how it could be preserved and archived. And this is when the Guelph-Humber technology gurus stepped in. So I explained my project and my archival problem to Radek Pakanowski and Mark Tavares, and I asked them if we could develop a digital environment where students might upload their field data. So they took my wish list that the data be easily uploaded, categorized, and searchable, and they customized a digital platform to specifications. It's called Ethnomedia, and it's under the umbrella of ghmedia.ca. And I thought it would be useful to take just a very mini tour of this, and Mark is going to help me do that. Right? So this is, we beta tested this last year, and kudos again to Radek and Mark who built this thing from the ground up. But Mark is showing you, this is what students would do. They would log into the site, and the first research ethics hoop that students would have to jump through would be to get consent forms and assent forms. And all this was run through the Research Ethics Board at University of Guelph. And so we have some models up here. Can we show like the consent form? So these are elaborate forms, and there's a certain language, you know, and it's legalistic in its ways. But students had to get the parents or the guardians to sign these for the children that they were going to study. And then the children themselves would sign assent forms, if we can see one of those, agreeing to the study. So we'd go no further until students had gotten that paperwork. And I should say that this would be uploaded to the site, but it would not be viewable to the public. We can see it now because Mark is an administrator on the site. So that's not viewable. So these are the forms that they would sign. Then from that point, then the project could really begin. And at this point then, the students would upload collected material. So can we see basically the genre list? So we built this together, and these are the sorts of items, subcategories that children would produce, and then my students would upload these. So when the students upload their projects, their items, they can tag them with these labels. So can we look at one? Let's look at counting out rhymes. Can we look at that? And so here's one, Tarzan, Jungle Man swinging from a rubber band. Some of you may remember that, right? But what I want to point out here, again, this is something to do with the browser. It's not as clear here, but each transcript would have a good solid paragraph of informant data that would give information about the child. You know, if this is an only child, it's going to be a certain kind of material. If this is the youngest of 4 siblings, it's going to be very different than the middle child. All this becomes grist for the analytical mill. And so all that would be would fall under the informant data. And then there would be the contextual data, which would be the circumstances under which the material was collected. So if it was just an interview with one child, well, obviously that's going to have a certain dynamic. But if it's a group of 5 kids that are playing, and that was documented, it would be very different. It would be set up as a sort of dialogue. And then finally you have the text itself. So this is all framed in the effort of placing a text in some larger social context in which it occurred, in the interest of sort of understanding the performance of a cultural form. So, all right, and I should say this, that all the transcripts, the names are all pseudonyms, because that's not necessarily relevant to the information itself. And we have the informant data, the contextual data, and the text. So I think that's a quick sampling. You get the idea. And I have 2 sections of that course this semester that will populate the site as well. So it's already starting to grow, as you can see. So can we look? Yeah. So you can see under here. You can see the sort of search terms that would be marked those particular assets, those particular items. And of course, any of these texts are all searchable. So any word, you can search by word, and if it shows up in a text, you would get any. So if you were interested in a jump rope rhyme, Cinderella dressed in yellow, you would type that in, and you could get every version of that came up, and then you could do some comparative analysis between those. And, okay, so thank you, Mark. So it was material from this growing repository of provocative ethnographic data at GH Media Site that initially inspired my current research. And so begins my lecture proper, which I call Your Kind of Place, Branding in Children's Culture. So just last winter, one of my students recorded a 12-year-old boy's ready-made insult to classmates. He said, "Your mama's so poor, she goes to Kentucky Fried Chicken to lick other people's fingers." And that's poor. Now, I might have been drawn to this item because my students say I have an affinity with Colonel Sanders. I mean, they say I have the same glasses, I have the same mustache, I have the same accent. But besides that, it's a funny image, this. A woman scuttling about the KFC, lapping up from diners' fingers the greasy remnants of the Colonel's secret recipe. But besides its humor, and whatever social business it may have accomplished among the informant's peers, the invective reminded me just how much children's folklore draws upon commercial culture. and how ready children are to adapt and satirize popular advertisements. Of course, ads saturating the lives and lore of children are not a new phenomenon. Consider this popular soft drink jingle from the late 30s. I should say they say half as much for a nickel too. This was an important part of Pepsi's advertising campaign because that was 12 ounces. This was the time when Coke had that little wasp-waisted bottle. And this is hard to believe in our current mode of supersized everything. 6 ounces was a regular Coke. It feels like a thimble to us. So during that era, that is late 30s, of radio advertising, without accompanying visual imagery to hook the consumers, it was essential that jingles be brief, memorable, and catchy. In that effort, the Pepsi ads smartly revitalized a snippet of melody from a familiar traditional Scottish air called Do You Ken John Peel, which itself drew upon an older folk song called Bonnie Annie, which has roots in the 18th century. Well, the jingle certainly stuck in the popular consciousness, making broadcast history as it was the first advertising jingle played and heard coast to coast. Life magazine declared it immortal, and Advertising Age magazine named it one of the top 10 jingles of the 20th century. In 1949 alone, the jingle played 296,426 times on 469 radio stations, and I had to count all of those. Right? And it played countless other times on jukeboxes across America where it was also a favorite. It became a popular song. Bob Garfield, co-host of NPR's On the Media, considers Pepsi-Cola Hits the Spot to be the granddaddy of all jingles. And he quips that it, quote, embedded itself not so much in the nation's psyche as in its very nerve endings. Like the Pledge of Allegiance, or, depending on your viewpoint, the case of shingles. As you know, jingles can get in there. Jingles and shingles, isn't it? That could have been a good title for the paper, Jingles and Shingles. It continued to circulate for a few decades through the war years and was later updated for a 1950s audience.
Pepsi Cola hits the spot, 12 full ounces, that's a lot. Twice as much for a nickel too. Pepsi Cola is the drink for.
Now I could give you a 40-minute talk that is a psychoanalytical analysis of this particular image, but that's a different talk. But it's really no surprise to us that a catchy jingle echoing in the ether for that long would naturally become a lightning rod for childhood parodies. In a 1959 live recording, Pete Seeger, who sadly died last week, in his 90s, right? But Pete Seeger was in concert and he was talking to the audience about how songs change over time. And he recalled singing John Peel, Do You Ken John Peel, to a school group on one occasion, noting their preferred lyrics to the traditional melody.
I was singing that to some kids in school, explaining that that came from an old English folk song. Do you ken John Peel at the break of day? Do you ken John Peel when he's far away? So on. With his hounds and his horns in the morning. All the kids say, you're not singing it right. This is the way we sing it. Pepsi Cola hits the spot, ties your belly in a knot. Tastes like vinegar, looks like ink. Pepsi Cola is a stinky drink. You make them up all the time.
Like Seeger's, all of the archived parodies of the Pepsi jingle that I corralled here duplicate the first line faithfully, exactly as it appears in the original jingle. And from there, the variances proliferate with all manner of intestinal and olfactory offense. Here's one from South Carolina in the 1950s.
Pepsi Cola hits the spot, in your stomach it will rot. Tastes like vinegar, smells like wine. Oh my God, it's turpentine.
A favorite rhyme appears to have been the culminating word pot in line 2, as in,
Pepsi Cola hits the spot, makes you vomit in the pot. Looks like water, tastes like wine. Oh my God, it's turpentine.
And with the pot, that is the toilet, designated as the consummate rhyme, predictably the parody spiraled into a scatological free-for-all.
Pepsi Cola hits the spot, especially when you're on the pot. Press the handle, pull the chain, and there goes Pepsi down the drain.
Or,
Pepsi Cola hits the spot, especially when you're on the pot. Press the button, pull the chain, out comes a little choo-choo train.
everyone knows what we're talking about here. Once supplanted by the Pepsi Generation campaign in 1963, the jingle no longer aired, but the parodies continued to circulate in oral tradition until well into the 1980s, some 50 years after the jingle was first broadcast on radio, as in,
Pepsi Cola hits the spot, makes you throw up in the pot. Throw it up till your face turns green, drink 7-Up with no caffeine.
Now we know that this version appeared after 1982, when 7-Up initiated its no caffeine campaign, which incidentally led the cola giants to cry foul at the company for ginning up phony concerns over the supposed health risks of caffeine. And not surprisingly, it became a non-issue once PepsiCo acquired a significant portion of 7-Up's global rights. Now, Seeger's ruminations on folk song alteration are well observed in this case. A bona fide folk song makes its way into popular culture as an advertising tool, and then was transformed back into genuine folk tradition through the parodies of children, who may well have never heard of John Peel or Bonnie Annie, or for that matter, even the original ad that inspired the parody. Another brand of the same era, Bosco chocolate syrup, was heavily marketed to children and provides us with another case study here. Now, Bosco was first produced in 1928, and though its sales always ran a distant second to the more popular Hershey's brand chocolate syrup, the company jingle, I Love Bosco, had real staying power in the popular and then in folk culture. Here's the original.
I love Bosco, it's rich in chocolate tea. Chocolate flavored Bosco is mighty good for me. Mama puts it in my milk for extra energy. Bosco gives me iron and sunshine vitamin D. Oh, I love Bosco, that's the drink for me.
It almost sounds, to me, I hear this, and it almost sounds like a sort of a calliope at the circus or something. You hear that in the background. So written in 1955, during the golden age of Madison Avenue, I Love Bosco was broadcast widely on radio and television and provided rich material for the mischievous young minds of the playground. The Bess Lomax Hawes archive of student folklore at Cal State Northridge holds 8 versions of the I Love Bosco parody, collected between 1960 and 68, located in a folder titled Anti-Parent Rhymes. One typical version is literally explosive.
I hate Bosco, it's full of TNT. Mommy put it in my milk to try to poison me. But I told my mommy I'd put it in her tea. Now there's no more mommy to try to poison me. Oh, I hate Bosco, it's not the drink for me.
Now, much of children's culture, by principle, stands in opposition to established adult social order. And as a result, in their lore, children will often resist and sometimes aggressively subvert the imposition of conventional adult authority. I pondered why that would be so graphically articulated in the Bosco parodies, and I suspect that it has something to do with the heavy-handed way that the original ads present the custodial responsibilities of mothers. The jingle and accompanying visuals in print and TV ads imply that adding Bosco to a child's diet is just an expression of good mothering. Mama puts it in my milk for extra energy. Bosco gives me iron and sunshine vitamin D. And if it's possible that that implication was lost on some consumers, it was labored in longer commercials like this one.
I love Bosco, it's rich in chocolate tea.
Hi everybody, I'm Virginia Grady. Gosh, aren't children bouncing with energy these days? And we mothers know that their better health is due to better foods, of course. And one of the most perfect foods is milk. And you can make milk even more perfect for your children by adding Bosco Milk Amplifier. This nutritious chocolate-flavored syrup adds iron and vitamin D and actually increases the food value and digestibility of milk. Yes, Bosco and milk builds healthier bones, stronger muscles, better teeth. And it's so easy to use. Just 1 tablespoon of chocolatey Bosco per glass makes children drink more milk and love it. And that's why children sing,
Oh, I love Bosco, that's the drink for me.
get Bosco at food stores everywhere.
That commercial will cost you $12 million at the Super Bowl. Did you see how long that commercial felt? So, children inverted the ad's intended message explicitly, outrageously, by transforming it into a song about dangerous adults. We might consider the themes of separation and abandonment that populate children's lore, like fairy tales and lullabies, for example. But this parody goes one step further yet, staging what is perhaps the most primal existential anxiety of children, the threat of filicide. Expressed here as a mother who would feed explosives to and poison her own little darling. In retaliation, the child, the intended victim, turns the tables and eliminates the threat. On the most obvious level, this parody depicts a moment of self-defense against a menacing mother. But the scenario can also be viewed more critically, I think, as a metaphor for the constant assault of toxic advertising that children face. So here, we have a reprisal against the opportunistic advertisers who would commodify the normalized values of dominant adult culture and then force-feed them to young consumers. It's easy to see why children would appreciate this parody for its retribution, unconscious though it might be. Now, most Americans, certainly, and I think probably North Americans, this would be the case, you can tell me, who were children during the 1960s and 70s will likely remember the playground songs about Comet Cleanser, which took the Colonel Bogey March, that is the whistling tune from Bridge on the River Kwai, into the world of consumer goods. And if that's just not ringing around in your head, I thought I'd help you out. I mean, this is one of the most familiar melodies of Western popular culture. Hear the whole song, but you may well remember that. So variants of Comet linger in oral tradition after more than 40 years since it first appeared in the late 1960s, as in this imperfectly sung rendition posted on YouTube in 2009.
Comet, it makes your lips turn green. Comet, it tastes like Listerine. Comet, it makes you vomit. So buy some Comet and vomit today.
Well, the little guy's looking for some approval from me. This song is not a parody, technically, because there was no existing jingle from Comet commercials that children then adapted and mocked. Rather, they crafted new comical lyrics for an already popular tune. The catchy two-note introductory figure of the march, that one, right, rhythmically accommodated the disyllabic word comet perfectly. And because the product's name forms such a conspicuous rhyme with the word vomit, most variants predictably became fixated on that bodily function. Indeed, in the many versions of the folk song, the conclusion of lines 3 and 4 always remains stable. That is, the listener is invited to ingest the cleanser and enjoy its emetic properties. Right? But there's a wide variance in the first 2 lines, however, where the rhyming possibilities seem endless, as in these few examples. Comet tastes like gasoline. Comet will make your eyes turn green. Or comet, it makes your teeth turn red. Comet, it makes you wet your bed. Or comet will get your bathroom clean. Comet will make your hair turn green. Comet, it makes your mouth turn square. Comet, it makes your bum grow hair. Sherman and Weisskopf posit that rhymes about cleaning products appear in children's lore as a subversive response to familiar parental warnings about handling and ingesting such substances. But as before, I think advertising itself is also lampooned here. Constantly assailed by commercial images and jingles, children likely grow to resent the bombardment, and they use folklore, as Mary and Herbert Knapp claim, as a means to defend themselves against becoming mere bundles of reflexes that are dominated by the ads. With songs like Comet, children scoff at the advice that advertisements have foisted upon them. Moreover, the song suggestively mocks commercially projected claims about domestic perfection. The obsession with cleanliness is seen in terms of damage or harm to the body. Eyes, teeth, and hair change unnatural colors. Unwanted body hair sprouts in private areas. Sheets are soiled with regressive bedwetting. None of these are good things to kids, right? Notably, all of the parodies that we've examined involve the ingestion of some well-branded product, and they address the implied dangers of voracious consumption. It seems fitting that these folk songs, which are reactions to relentless advertising and branding, telegraph children's acute awareness of themselves as consumers. Now, we might compare a local example that I'm sure we're all well acquainted with. And before I show it, I wonder if there's a jingle that's rolling around in your head right now that's so familiar to Ontario, to Canadians in general. Anybody want to guess where I'm going with this?
Birdieland?
Close. Now, and I apologize ahead of time because now this melody's going to be repeated all days, right? I know you probably spent about a month getting it out, now it's back in, right? So the Sleep Country Canada ads proliferate across the airwaves, and the company's memorable, and let's face it, sometimes nagging jingle has been rated as one of Canada's catchiest advertising melodies. Well, the jingle certainly reverberates through the brains of children who, in summer camp, sing,
Sleep Country Canada, why buy a mattress? You've got a couch.
Now, what's written as a claim of brand superiority becomes for children a refreshingly anti-consumerist message. Why buy a mattress at all when you can reasonably utilize the resources that you already own? In the spirit of reduce, reuse, and recycle, this is an environmentally friendly parody. Right? Another version is more frugal yet, even severely so.
Sleep Country Canada, why buy a mattress? Sleep on the floor.
So there you don't even get the couch. Well, no paper on this topic could ignore the pervasive influence of McDonald's. In addition to being one of the first corporations to engage in lifestyle branding, McDonald's is well known for aggressively targeting children with a diverse arsenal of promotional strategies. Child-friendly characters, Happy Meals, film and merchandising tie-ins, and so on. McDonald's is one of North America's largest distributors of toys, and the corporation operates more than 8,000 playgrounds nationally. It's no wonder then that the McDonald's brand is so well stamped into children's awareness. The restaurant chain has kept its hired advertising agencies busy with no fewer than 37 separate ad campaigns since 1960. A few of the memorable ones shown here. Certainly this isn't the full list, but these are probably the most memorable ones. Now, Your Kind of Place in the late 60s and into the 70s is widely considered to be one of McDonald's most successful campaigns. Like Pepsi Cola hits the spot before it, this jingle is based on a familiar folk song, the Negro spiritual Down by the Riverside, which circulated in the antebellum South and was recorded countless times in the 20th century. Here's how McDonald's rendered it.
McDonald's is our kind of place. It's such a happy place. Happy place. A clean and snappy place. McDonald's is our kind of place. It's such a happy place. McDonald's is our kind of place. Your kind of place.
catchy tune to be sure, and children were quick to invent new lyrics for it.
McDonald's is your kind of place. They serve you rattlesnakes, French fries up your nose, pickles between your toes, and don't forget those chocolate shakes. They come from polluted lakes. McDonald's is your kind of place. The last time that I went there, they stole my underwear. I really didn't care. It was my dirty pair. The next time that you go there, they'll serve my underwear. McDonald's is your kind of place.
Now sometimes the parody would go on, like this one, for multiple verses, as if to tell us that just a single stanza cannot contain the full range of disgusting contaminations and putrefied substances that children wish to catalog. Choice snippets from other versions include these lines: Ronald is a mental case, McDonald's ain't your kind of place, or ketchup running down your back, I want my money back before I have a heart attack, or McDonald's was your kind of place until we burned it down, we burned it to the ground, we even burned the clown. McDonald's was your kind of place. Here we have pyromania again, right? Your kind of place parodies became a staple of North American children's lore with remarkable longevity. We can only imagine how McDonald's executives may have winced at the thought of their most prized demographic, children, associating the brand with pollution, poor hygiene, vulgarity, heart disease, mental illness, arson, and murder. However, Fortune 500 companies don't easily capitulate. To wit, McDonald's became even more enterprising with a 1980s ad campaign featuring African-American youth jumping rope while chanting McDonald's menu items. Launched perhaps as a corrective to earlier campaigns that had been ruthlessly mocked by children, this one was shrewd in its suggestion of authenticity, and it was targeted directly to urban youth culture as prepackaged folklore. Staged as a double Dutch rope jumping session, the sales pitch mimics a ludic vernacular that traditionally would be antithetical to all things adult or institutional. The subversive potential of parody is neutralized when the expressive form is co-opted and then rendered civic, wholesome, and most importantly, commercial. Here we see the quintessence of incorporation, which is control and containment. In this instance, control of the sellable message and containment of disruptions to that message. By all estimates, it was a successful strategy for McDonald's as it continued over several years with a series of jump rope commercials that were then actively imitated rather than parodied on the playgrounds. And eventually the content became a part of genuine folk culture with very little subversive manipulation by children. And given this, we can say it was a brilliant strategy. They said, look, we're just going to make the ad folklore and it can be delivered ready-made to the kids. And this pretty much seems to be what happened. In 1990 and 91, Ann Richmond Barrison, pictured here, conducted a study of double Dutch jump rope play among 3rd through 5th grade girls in an urban working-class racially integrated public schoolyard in Pennsylvania. The months-long investigation generated video footage covering 27 days of recess and 51 days of live audio recording. Barrison observed that many of the more vintage traditional rhymes were outshouted, she says, by the newest one called Big Mac, which she labeled as a corporate menu chant, and many of the girls identified it as their favorite. In fact, Big Mac represented 40% of all the songs sung for Double Dutch during the extensive study, far and away the most popular among all the participants. Now since then, many variants have been well documented, from virtual replications of the original Double Dutch ad to elaborate hand-clapping versions with additional verses imported from children's lore and other McDonald's commercials. You know, I chose this image because it looked like Ronald McDonald's clapping, and as I look at it now, it looks more like he's praying. To whom, I don't know. Now, time doesn't permit a full survey of all these other versions, right? But I did want to share one striking example. It's an exchange between a Peace Corps volunteer and a 10-year-old Senegalese girl named Ada Lowe. And it was recorded in 2010. Now, it's inconceivable that Ada Lowe would have learned the rhyme among local peers in Senegal, seeing as McDonald's does not operate or actively advertise there. Indeed, I discovered that she was taught the rhyme by one of the American Peace Corps volunteers who remembered it from her own youth growing up in Pittsburgh in the 1990s. This exchange illustrates just how extensive and insidious the reach of advertising can be in a slippery process that we might call folk marketing, which, like marketing in general, has one primary imperative: exploiting and propagating brand equity that can then be converted into capital value. However this folk form made its way into Ada Lowe's ludic repertoire, we can be sure that the marketing department at McDonald's International would be pleased to find it there. And just because McDonald's has no physical presence in Senegal currently, doesn't mean that the country is not on their global conquest wish list. It seems only a matter of time. After all, a new McDonald's restaurant opens up somewhere in the world about every 3 hours. I'm stunned to find out that statistic. Right? And do you find this ad nearly as creepy as I do? Sorry to be ending on a bit of a cynical note here, but advertising can be cynical business. Exposed to nearly 8,000 brands a day, children are potential lifetime customers and therefore their primary targets. Admirably, they employ folklore as a mechanism to diffuse, to interrupt, and undermine the advertising onslaught. But corporations take very seriously their mission to trademark the cognitive space that is children's culture, to the point that even the folk process can be appropriated or incorporated, as we've seen, for commercial interests. And so, the playground itself can be viewed as something of a branding battlefield. Thank you. All right, I'd be happy to entertain some discussion, some questions, rebuttals. Is that how, the next thing is questions, discussion, right?
I'll try.
Yeah, okay.
So we know with, say, Walt Disney, right? So like Walt Disney films, and I know I'm making a little bit of a leap here, but we know with Walt Disney films that they tend to reflect society, right? And reflect the current state. So back in the 1940s, we had, you know, that kind of iconic image of a Cinderella waiting for his man, and now we have, you know, slightly different, like in the 90s to the 2000s, we had The Lion King, which was a radical difference in terms of, you know, we have a little boy instead of a little girl. Yeah. We have a dad that dies, a mother that stays alive. It's a miracle, the woman lives, you know, and she's not evil. All of these great things. I know, life, and how society then changes. Yeah. Right? So we're being able to look at Walt Disney films with children and be able to see how society changes. And I'm wondering, as we were going through it, I was kind of seeing the same kind of iconic changes as you went through time. Yeah. And I was wondering about that idea of reflecting on society or the images.
I should say, thank you, that's good. I should say that this is just the tip of the iceberg here. And what we did with the ethnomedia kind of sparked this in my mind. So I thought the first thing to do is kind of do a historical sweep. Right? And so this took me back, and so what I went to archive, and I found out the products that were being, or the jingles that were being poked fun at. And then, you know, I didn't know all this about Bosco chocolate syrup, you know, and I sort of learned it all. And so there's definitely another chapter to this. And certainly, I would say that any folk form, any popular culture form is absolutely going to reflect the culture that produces it. It all, I mean, how, you know, Barbie has gone through all kinds of changes, right? I mean, she, you know, there for a while, there was the Malibu Barbie, and then she had a business suit and a briefcase for a while. And Interestingly, you mentioned Disney is Disney Snow White, and the whole empire is built on Snow White. And it's based on the Grimm fairy tale. But the Grimm tale is very different. And the question then comes up is, why is it different? If they were basing it on this tale, why would it be different? Because it reflected some of the cultural sensibilities of the time. And it's very particular in the German originally, in Snow White. When Snow White comes into the dwarf's cottage, the literal translation it was indescribably clean and neat. Well, you'll remember how it is in the film, Disney film, is it's complete wreck. And so much so that you can have a big song about cleaning it up, right? And so here was the thing. And of course, and in the original, Snow White was 7 years old. Well, no one would look at the Disney film and think she's 7, right? So Disney, for whatever reason, we could explicate this, they were uncomfortable introducing a 7-year-old girl into a house full of men. Diminutive, albeit, but still fully grown men with fully functioning adult men parts, right? And they were uncomfortable with that. So what do? They turn her into a mother figure, and they infantilize them. And so she does all these sort of classic, stereotypical motherly things. You know, she even sends them. She says, "You wash up for dinner," and she stands like this, and she even reinforces a bedtime, I think, and has them wash up, you know, and then cleans the house. Right? And these reflect some dominant, you know, assumptions about female domestic responsibility at the time that weren't reflected in 1812 when the Grimm brothers collected this story. But so this was the make or break for Disney, right? He put his whole family fortune into Snow White, and if it had not been successful, we wouldn't know anything about Disney now, right? But as we know. Well, we know how that story went. Any other comments? Yeah, Theo.
Yeah. First of all, I just want to say I think this is absolutely brilliant. Like, it's really cool. It's like the universe experience that you want, where you say, "I've never thought of this before. I've never thought of this." Like, I've never thought of all these rhymes as being kind of like a way of children insulating themselves or protecting themselves or fighting back against this ongoing onslaught of messaging. And that's really cool.
Yeah.
And it led me to think, and I talked to you a little bit before this presentation about this kind of disquiet that I had over this movement of corporations being able to sponsor textbooks and computers and playground equipment in schools with discrete labels on it. And I felt really disquieted about it. And I think now part of me understanding that disquiet is how do kids maintain this kind of ability to critically think about stuff they're always exposed to if it's always in their face so much it becomes their ongoing reality?
Look, I mean, we know clearly why those companies are doing that. They want to brand these kids as early as they can, and if a brand is familiar to them, then you know that will be turned into some monetary gain. I mean, we know that, right? But you know, I think what we could say is that children are figuring some devices on the playground to insulate themselves, as you said. And as I said, I've only done the preliminary research on this. I really am anxious to get to the next part, just to see how this is happening now, because branding doesn't happen less than it used to, it happens a lot more. And you know, clearly, I think that children are developing skills at insulating themselves somehow in this, but
So my question, would you feel like that would be compromised if you had this textbook with a little TD Bank on it, or the playground sponsored by Pepsi? Would that be compromised?
Well, look, I think that. I think it's sort of, it's preloading, and it's, in some ways it should be off limits, but, you know, there's the culture jammers, you know, people like Banksy said, you know, apparently what's happened is there is no DMZ for advertising. There is no neutral zone. It's everywhere. And, you know, I remember the first time I was at a movie and saw a commercial before the movie, and everybody booed. I mean, it was like, it's really my memory, and it wasn't that long ago, and people just went, I mean, it was almost like it was Elizabethan or something. People were boo, boo. People were like throwing stuff on the screen almost like that. And now it's just, we sit there passively, and there's this whole pre-show of commercials that now is standard practice. But, you know, it's pithy and definitely worth talking about. Yeah?
Your database you started with, and maybe I didn't see the thing wrong correctly, but the kids were 13 to 18 years old?
No, there were two, this was, we just sort of rattled through that quickly. There are two sets of assent forms that the kids have to sign. There's one consent form that's signed by the parents and the guardian, but so there's one for kids from 4 to 12, and the language of it reflects a kind of language that they would understand and they could sign it. And then so that, in some ways, that was an arbitrary breaking point. So the one that we saw was probably maybe a 14-year-old kid who shared that particular item. Right? So there are two assent forms depending on the age of the child.
Okay.
So, you know.
So watching the McDonald's one in particular, you saw the branding progress, and now you watch on social media, there are a lot of adult representations of jingles that aren't parodized. So I'm wondering, do you feel like that might be because we are so immersed, we grow into this culture? Like there's the gospel McDonald's thing, the drive-through McDonald's songs, and it's teenagers kind of for the social media elements. And I was just kind of wondering, pre the 2000s and pre this immersion, would adults adapt into an unparodized form, or is that something new that now that we are so...
Okay, I'm not sure I quite follow the question. Can you give me an example of one of the...
So what I'm kind of thinking is like, now teens and young adults are making parodies of McDonald's that really aren't parodies. They're still just our own kind of advertisements. There's one where he goes up to the drive-thru and he's like, I want a Big Mac, 2 cheeseburgers and fries, no sauce on the side.
Right, and which is in itself, it's a commercial.
It's a commercial, but they created it on their own. So I'm wondering, is this creation, did this happen before? Like, in the 60s, yeah, you had kind of that advertising, but it's not to the same extent. You didn't have playgrounds endorsed by McDonald's. So is this kind of spurring out of that?
The question, the answer is, I don't know, right? But it's definitely worth considering, you know, we look at this, the social climate in the 60s, it was so different, and it was very anti-corporate in a lot of ways. What was the one we were talking about at the meeting? Oh, the Arby's thing that happened. With the Grammys, it was Daft Punk, everyone was wearing the hat, right? And somebody noticed that it looked like the Arby's hat. And they just posted the picture next to the Arby's hat, and then it went viral, and Arby's, of course, was loving this, right? Because all of a sudden their brand was cool. These people just won a Grammy, right? And then even the response was, hey, what's your roast beef with me? That's what was coming from Dad. And then that's just like, okay, now the branding the product, and this is like, you cannot buy that kind of advertisement. But so these things, if it's McDonald's, must love it, right? Because if it, you know, again, this is the Naomi Klein concept, is that if you can brand, if you can capture cool, if you can brand cool, and so advertisers are constantly after youth culture because that's what's cool, right? Jerry, you had a question?
Well, a question and sort of a comment. Anyone that's been in my office always sees a quote from one of your neighbors down south, Joseph Chilton Pierce, who really has done a study on and has written about, and I'll give you the quote, to live a creative life, we have to lose the fear of being wrong. And it is something that I really embrace for media studies students, simply because I think that we take children and we create in them a fear of being wrong. And I'm going to go back to what you said about McDonald's. In the playground, there's no fear because you're with your peers. And that's where you get the real creativity. On social media, which is the electronic playground, because there's not always an identification of who you are, there's no fear. And so you get some of that coming out, and that creativity, it comes out when we lose that fear of what's someone going to think if I say potty or whatever the term might be.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely complicated because, I mean, there are some fears on the playground not related to those things. I mean, you know, if you had a bully on your playground, you would remember that. You know, and, I talk in my class, and when we talk about children as a subcultural group is that the world of play is sort of limited perfection, which sounds like an oxymoron. It's not perfect. If it's perfect, why would it be limited, right? Because in some ways it does welcome kids in. They can all enter at their own level, and kids are dedicated to the world of play and to extending playtime. But also it can be a cruel, very Darwinian environment, as we all will remember.
I noticed one of the things you had here were the rules. There is unwritten rules in the playground. There's things that all kids know that you do and you don't do.
Yeah, yeah.
Going back just slightly on that and going back, sorry, it was like, it's a funny spot to take over, Jerry, sorry. But I was thinking about what she was saying about this, how do teenagers, is it a parody, right? So in the past, we make funny words, and I kind of was left as you were speaking about that, is I'm wondering, there's a feeling as an adult that I have is when a child makes a parody and talks about the potty in relationship to a product, makes me think like, well, they don't like it. Except that I have an 8-year-old and he thinks it's hilarious talking about the potty, which then makes me wonder, and your question then made me think, and your question made me think, I wonder if all of this is the individual trying to make it their own. So as a child, we're making it our own by saying potty and making these really funny words.
I mean, what better way to make it your own than basically mark your territory by
pissing. And then we have, as teenagers, they're making up, and now this new culture, so when we're talking about reflecting culture, making YouTube videos, making it funny in a different way, and yet making it their own. And I was wondering if maybe that's the connection.
Yeah, maybe it is. This is interesting. I should say, let's go back to the Bosco ads. It's more complicated than I presented it, because I think those ads are presented really to the mothers in some sense, right? Because, that one commercial says, when you give your kids this, mothers, she's addressing other mothers, right? But then the song comes in, which is in the voice of children. So there's this multivalent thing going on where it's pitched to mothers and it's pitched to kids at the same time. And that in itself is like you're trying to get oil and water together, because there are really different messages that those groups want to attach themselves to, right? So this is similar, and it's all worth considering. So. 2 years from now, I'll do another one of these talks, and I'll have more to say about it. I'm definitely going to think about it some more.
Just wanted to say, I kind of had this idea that we'd lost the battle for our children's minds when they started paying corporations to advertise for them. Like, Nike doesn't pay a kid to wear a swoosh on their shirt. The kid pays Nike for the Nike with the swoosh. Like, it's almost like that, some sort of line got crossed where now, that whole critical thinking about kids kind of mocking jingles, but then talking about cheap teenagers and what they choose to wear, where they actually pay the corporation to do the advertising for them.
Yeah, but Theo, what drives the corporations nuts, crazy, is what is hot today can be ice cold by 4 o'clock this afternoon. And in other words, that Nike swoosh, it is worn by a lot of students and kids, but that can change at a heartbeat. And I've seen that, where something has been the in thing, and right now on the radar that a lot of people are watching is Facebook. There's a lot of predictions coming out that Facebook is all of a sudden going to become very cool. Or not cool, sorry, in the next 5 years.
Well, I guess all us older people are using it.
This is it, because
it's not cool.
Because youth culture is cool, and they showed the numbers, and then over the past 2 years, the teenage use of Facebook has gone down. Sure. Meanwhile, my age, right, has gone up like this, and then basically the kids don't want to be part of it anymore because their parents discovered it. And then now it's, how can it be cool if their parents are on Facebook? Oh, did you friend me? Did you like me? The kids don't want to hear that.
Having said that, it's also the brands have now developed it, right? So you have like tons of brands that have gone to Facebook to find you as well, so it's not the same. Right?
So have you, this latest thing with both McDonald's and Coca-Cola have these social media platforms connected to the Olympics, and they wanted people to put in they're your favorite athlete and all this, and basically because of all the gay rights issues that have kind of covered the Olympics, these social media sites have been completely populated by the LGBT community. And that basically both Coke and McDonald's had to shut them down because they became these platforms for social activism. And all of a sudden, Coke and McDonald's found themselves on the wrong side of the cool, right? And so they just had to shut it down. And that's, you know, really backfired what they were trying to do. You know, this is good. I love this stuff. I get paid for this.
Just talking about the Facebook note, like it really goes along with the idea of subcultures and trying to isolate yourselves from the dominant culture. So originally Facebook was for youth. It was originated like for college students.
Yeah.
Now, as you said, it's more adults. And in this, youth are finding solace in other media sites, especially Tumblr is the most popular demographic for 16 to 20. That's why girls can customize it on their own, and it's an interrelated social networking on this virtual playground, free from the prying eyes of adults.
Yeah.
That's why there was such a huge scandal when Yahoo aimed to buy it, because they were thinking about taking away the porn, taking, like filtering it, creating age restrictions. So I feel like it really just reflects that concept of subculture.
Yeah, good. This is all good.
I'm just thinking of Coca-Cola because you did a lot about Coca-Cola. Like nowadays on Facebook, it was a while ago, but on Facebook, they had a thing going on, which my sister almost did. Oh my gosh, now I think of it. It was to the Coca-Cola music, you would dance to it and upload it, and then the next person who sees it dances to it, and like just in your home. So people like putting up YouTube videos on Facebook with their own dance to the Coca-Cola music.
Yeah, well,
like,
so if Coke could like crowdsource people that are propagating their jingle, what could be better for them?
And the thing was that up to, I think it was 200,000 for every video posted, they would put it towards a cause, but it's only up to 200,000. So how many more people are actually putting up videos?
Yeah. It's a brave new world. I don't know how brave it is, but it's a new world. Yeah.
What's your take on subliminal messaging, like in children? Like if you've performed any research on it? Or...
I haven't done any research on this, and I know that there were some big studies in the 70s about subliminal ads, and I mean my favorite anecdote about that was the Ritz cracker ad that wrote the word sex on all the crackers. You know, they had the well, this is when they would insert just frames in, you know, like a couple of frames, and they had the crackers arranged on the tray, and then they inserted one frame in that had the same arrangement, but sex was on all the crackers. So the theory was that somebody would watch that commercial and go, huh, I would like a cracker right now. And a cigarette. I don't know. But, yeah, I mean, I haven't done any particular research on that, and I don't know, you know, I mean, I'm sure it's happening, you know, and I read some of those older studies about that, and liquor ads are sort of famous for it too, because, you know, they would shoot these photos of a glass of vodka, and the ice, of course, because it was under the lights, they weren't real ice cubes. They were pre-molded out of something. So they could mold them in whatever shapes they wanted, and apparently there were all these naked bodies and wrapped. There was one with a bear and a woman in this embrace, and but I guess it still happens.
There's a lot of mythology about subliminal messages. I mean,
or how effective it really is, and all this. And
the one that I remember in the 60s was that they slipped in the middle of a movie, a large popcorn and a large Pepsi or Coke. And apparently Pepsi and Coke and popcorn sales went sky high. I've never seen any documentation.
Yeah, and those who took my narrative class will say, this sounds like a legend, you know. Supposedly this is what happened, right? And, yeah. Well, good. I think it's working up. I can feel the ebb, you know, for the next chapter, right? So, what's next for us?
Well, on behalf of Academic Services and everyone here, we'd like to thank you very much for delivering this lecture, and please take this as a token of our gratitude. And this concludes our feature lecture for this afternoon. We hope to see everybody at our next feature lecture, which will be next year. Thank you very much for coming. If you'd like to make your way outside, we have some light refreshments.
And I can eat now.
That's fantastic.
That's my pleasure. Yeah, thank you for your help. So you guys have made it possible, really. That was really well.